Last night, as I was getting ready for bed, I was a little bit concerned about this morning's sermon because, to be honest, I hadn't quite worked it all out in my head. I have a little bit different of a process of coming up with sermons than many pastors do. It seems to work, or at least I hope it works for me. I will read the scriptures several times and think about what's going on in the scripture, of course, first, and then also in our world, maybe in our church, and go back to it and wait for something to stick out to me. And then I will actually come up with the title before I write the sermon, which is very opposite of what a lot of people do. It's just one of those things. There for a little while I was coming up with some pretty crazy titles, and we might happen to do that again down the road. I don't know why it occurs that way, but that's how it does. And then I'll spend the week, or sometimes if I come up with this in advance, a few weeks, thinking about it and trying to tie them together. On a few occasions, I've switched some things, including the title, but that's only happened once or twice. I'll listen for God's voice, I'll pray about it, I'll do research and read commentaries from biblical scholars, but never really write much down until, at best, maybe Friday evening. Often, Sunday morning around 6 a.m. is when I'm finally putting it all together. And last night I was a little restless because it hadn't really come to me yet, but I've experienced so many times when I wake up in the morning refreshed and it all kind of comes to me. So I had some faith about this. But it was warm in the room I was sleeping in, and I had to open up some windows. And I really kind of thought to myself, well, I know when I wake up, it'll come to me. I'll be able to patch this all together somehow. But I opened up those windows to cool the room off because I didn't want to throw in any air conditioners yet. Didn't feel like going up to the attic to take the plywood off the vent cover so that we could run the fan yet. It's a little too early for all that. And I went to sleep. Sometime before 5:20 a.m., a bird woke me up. I know it was before 5:20 a.m. because I set my alarm for 5:20, and I know you all know the feeling of when you wake up before your alarm goes off. It's really kind of disappointing some days. I don't know what time it was, but this bird was loud and clear, like it had been shining out for hours, and it wasn't even close to that yet. Could hear it coming through the window. Then again, sometime before 5:20, I woke up again hearing not only the bird, but also a car alarm, which is kind of an odd thing. You don't really hear car alarms going off around here a lot. And I was frustrated at this point because I had thought to myself at 5:20, wow, something's talking to me about this bird. If I just get another hour of sleep, it'll come to me and I'll be able to put it together. I had that temptation to set my alarm for 6:20, wake up a little bit later, and be okay. But then at 5:20, it happened. The alarm went off, and now there were more birds joining in. There was no going back to sleep. I knew that somebody somewhere wanted me to stay awake because things were brewing in my mind. They do that a lot, and I'm sure it happens to you as well, either right before you drift off to sleep or as you are waking in the morning. I couldn't really reset my alarm at that time because, well, I needed to be awake. Something was telling me that, and by this point, I had to go to the bathroom. So now it's time to really get out from under the covers because there's just no waiting on that anymore. I knew I was awake, and on my way to the bathroom, well, the dog begins to whine. Rarely whines this early in the morning, so I had to take the dog out before I could go out in my own way. Something wanted me to be awake and not go back to sleep. Something was telling me that there was a presence, even in what I was kind of starting to feel was a little bit of turmoil in my life. First world problems, to not be able to go back to bed in a room that you can control the temperature in. But still, I was getting a little frustrated. And by the way, all this is going on, and you can still hear that same bird. I know it was the same bird, because it was the same song. Beautiful song, but was a little annoying at this point by now. I don't know what kind of bird it is. I'm really not that good at all those things. Now, I guess I could have yelled at the bird, first woke me up, and the bird might have got quiet. If I really had lost it and lived in a different neighborhood, I might have even loaded a shotgun and just pointed it in a general direction and finished the bird situation. But I knew that God was revealing something to me and was trying to get my attention. I don't know why or how. I guess it's because I listened for those things in my life. God was revealing something, though I didn't know how long this would go on. I knew at that point that God is God and will show up at times when I may least expect them to. That will begin to speak to me that the world's going to wake up whether I want to go back to bed or not, and that church has to happen at 9 a.m. whether I want to sleep to 6:20 or not, and I had better be prepared for it. And then, for whatever reason, when I recalled my sermon title, that God is God, I don't know why, but my mind drifted to the country of Syria. Of course, I'm sure with current events. I honestly hadn't given it much thought at all this weekend, which is a little bit odd for me. I normally pay attention to those things, but Friday night when our country and others fired missiles towards Syria or into Syria, I was in class, didn't find out about it till after class, and quite frankly had a lot of reading to do before the class the next morning. So I went to sleep. But Syria came to mind in the bits and pieces I knew about it, and how confusing that may be, how it must be to wake up sometimes in that country. I want to list for you some countries: Turkey, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and of course when the United States show up, France and Britain come along. It kind of reminds me of like when Richie Cunningham shows up in Happy Days, there's always Patsy Weber and Ralph Mouth there. Whatever the United States involved, you can guarantee that France and Britain will be there. They're good friends and good allies to have on your side. Rarely leading the way, but always there by your side. That's a lot of countries, and that's only a partial list of those who have an interest, for whatever reason, in the country of Syria. So I imagined myself, I began to think of all of those things, and I kind of thought, well, if you're just watching it on TV, if you're just hearing these news reports, it really may not seem like a big deal. These are kind of things that have gone on in our world before. But what if you're a child in the middle of Syria, and that list of countries is somehow taking an interest for different reasons in your world, and of that list, at least 5 of them have dropped bombs or missiles on your country? Perhaps justified. And not only have they done it, your own country has done it to you as well. How complicated and terrifying that might be. And all of a sudden, the bird wasn't a big deal to me anymore. I can't imagine waking up in a world like that, where bombs and missiles are a part of your life. Not a news event, not something that's part of a news cycle, not even a political controversy, a part of your life. Only because you happen to be born there, not because of anything you did. And I thought about other children. I thought about children like Bryson, and other children in the world who have been hurt by their governments or hurt by the lack of leadership in their government. And I was reminded of our prayers of confessions, how so often we point out the sins of others but fail to look at our own. Now, I cannot pretend to try and compare one country to another, but I know that humans are humans, and God is God, and I can't imagine the frustration God has in our world today, and has probably always had, with the way we treat each other. I thought of those other children. Honestly, I thought of children that I met who stood at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. I met these teenagers, and they were gassed by their local government. If you don't know and you're not aware, there's Standing Rock reservations in the United States, and they just wanted to protect their water, or at least the rights to their water. Now, again, that's a complicated situation. Lots of this are, but sending tear gas towards teenagers who are trying to protect water, or even think they're trying to protect water, it's not really complicated to me. I thought of children who, at Waco in Texas, many years ago, not that long ago, were killed because of their decision, or their parents' decision, to be a part of a faith community that others did not like as much. They hadn't hurt anybody. They had done some things that, sure, the government didn't like, but these children followed the faith of their parents, and died in a bus burning. Their government did that to them, and if you don't know where Waco, Texas is, that's in the United States, by the way, and it was the federal government who was there. Again, these things happen. So often we forget to look in the mirrors. I thought of children in Flint, Michigan, who will have to wait until, at the earliest, the year 2020, until they can turn on the faucets in their house and get a glass of water. In Flint, Michigan, in a country where, and not far from where they build, or used to build, some of the most amazing vehicles in the world, where innovation was such a strong thing in that part of the world, in a country where we've sent people to space and we continue to look into those frontiers, where we are helping children in other countries by protecting them from their evil dictators, and yes, Assad is a bad man. In Flint, Michigan, children can't turn on their faucet and get a drink of water. That happened because the government neglected them, knowingly neglected them as well. Again, complicated, I'm sure, by people on different sides. So, by this point, as I'm thinking about this stuff, the dog's been out and I'm getting ready, the bird isn't singing anymore, though the sun has come out. And I noticed that the bird wasn't singing anymore, as I fell on this knowledge and reflection of just how bad humans can treat each other. Not just other countries, and certainly not just our country. And of course, as I've said many times, I love the ideals that we represent. But I also know that we are human, and we are not God. Neither is any other country. Neither is any state in any other country either. But the bird isn't singing anymore. And I think of a book I read once in a military literature class at military school. It was called And No Birds Sing. It was written by a British veteran named Farley Mowatt, who went on to write many books. Farley fought for the British Army in the Sicily campaign. He came back from war, as he writes, with a feeling of wanting to reject his own species. He was aghast at what he had done and what he had seen humans wreak upon each other in war. He went in, he tried to go in the military and was rejected at first. He didn't go in reluctantly. He wanted to first join the Air Force in Britain, and they wouldn't take him. He ended up in the Army and had quite a list of decorations as a leader, and had the respect of the soldiers underneath him in battle as well. Though he fought in the Sicily campaign, something about knowing this was World War II made me think of German soldiers, oddly enough. Not American soldiers, but for some reason I began to think of German soldiers, who, again, for whatever reasons, were on the wrong side of history for sure. But still, many of them youth or kids as well. And what horrors old men will get young men to do on their behalf. I thought of the German soldiers, I think, because I envisioned German having that front on both sides in both world wars. And again, certainly not trying to let Germany off the hook on their parts in this, or their leadership as well. But there again, going into both wars, there was an opportunity to prevent that long before we ended up in the situations we did. We did the right thing at the time we did it, along with the rest of the world, but the right thing could have been very different had it been started much sooner. That's a fact of history that is almost irrefutable. And yet, we did those things at great cost to all the countries. But I thought of those German soldiers stuck in the middle, only because of where they were born, and that they might be sent to the Western Front or the Eastern Front, and what it must be like to not know which side of the country you're going to be defending from which army, either the Soviets on one side or the Allies on another side. And how it must be for a child, whether that child was in Britain during World War II or in Germany, to live in fear of bombs and missiles. Just a child, not an evil child, a child, because of evil men in the wrong place at the wrong time in history. how a child might want to flee those areas, how a Syrian child might want to flee their country because they live in a place where, again, not only have other countries, again, strategically sent missiles into their country, but still, you hear those things going overhead and you feel the explosions. So we may see on our news stations that we have strategically and precisely placed those missiles exactly where we know they need to go. But when you're 6 years old and don't have CNN, you don't know that. All you feel is the ground shaking and the dust coming at you again, not knowing who it is bombing you this time. Will there be chemicals again, or will their building be destroyed? Will they lose yet another family member? So I can imagine a child wanting to flee this situation, wanting to go to another country, and even, oddly enough, trying to get to countries that are dropping some of those very bombs. What I can't imagine is that the doors are closed on them. This year, in 2018, our country has accepted 11 Syrian refugees. 11. 11 people from a country where thousands and thousands are fleeing. That's how good our vetting process is working. We've only been able to let 11 of them in. I might be a little off on that number, but it's less than 20 for sure. So I thought about those children, and it's all really too much to figure out for me at this point. I'm thinking I have to get my sermon written. This is too much to think about now. I can't fix these problems in Syria. And so I turned to the scripture, and I read our scriptures again for today because I needed some sort of inspiration. I'd like to read to you from the book of Acts again. When Peter saw it, he addressed the people. You Israelites, why do you wonder at this, and why do you stare at us, as though by our own power or piety we made him walk? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the God of our ancestors, has glorified this servant Jesus, whom you handed over and rejected in the presence of Pilate, though he had decided to release him. But you rejected the holy and righteous one, and asked to have a murderer given to you. And you killed the author of life, whom God raised from the dead. To this we are witnesses. And by faith in his name itself has made this man strong, whom you see and know. And that faith is perfect through Jesus, has given him his perfect health in the presence of all you. And from our gospel lesson in Luke. While we were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he said this, he showed them his hands and feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate in their presence. This is a God, our God is a God that shows up in human form. Not just in Jesus, but in the hearts and minds and actions of the followers of Jesus. He shows up in human form, and as we spoke about last week, every time Jesus shows up, he brings peace. If he's not bringing peace, it's not Jesus showing up. When he shows up in the story, he not only says, "Peace be with you," he proves who he is from the scars on his hands and in his side. And then he does something that is really odd to me. And I can't take much from it except for remembering that God is God and we are not. Jesus brings peace. He proves who he was. And then he says, "I'm hungry. Do you have anything to eat?" That's kind of a chill thing to do in the middle of revealing the most human history has occurred. That the one thing that will change the world more than any other event has happened. The Messiah was born, the Messiah was crucified and died and was resurrected and was there standing in front of them. And the Messiah wants a piece of fish to eat. There's calmness from this person who is fully human and fully God in this situation. There's doubt and disbelief and joy and all sorts of other confusing emotions going on in the disciples. But there's God in the form of Jesus, having a piece of fish and eating it in front of them while they are going through all this. I wonder what God is doing these days. I wonder if they are kicking back and eating or watching us go through these times. I don't think so. I think in that moment, Jesus was just watching it unfold. Maybe taking it in a second, and this was just a way to pass the time and fit in. I know that God is watching our world unfold as well. I know that God is at work in this world and that God is still speaking. In all of this, in those times in that room, though they thought God had left them when Jesus died, God returned. And God sent them forth to do the same things. The call wasn't just to believe, but was also to do work and to stay in conversation with God. And so I take great relief in that simple fact that God is God and we are not. We won't always get it right. We might even have our doubts about God, even in the presence of God standing there right in front of us. But God is God. We don't have to get it right all the time, but we do have to try. We do have to stay at work in this world. We do have to speak to others about God, and we still have to stay in conversation with God, just as the disciples were doing in that room. We won't always get it right. We don't have to always get it right. I don't know what to do with Syria, and I don't know whether or not our country should be a part of that. I can see the arguments on both sides of this situation. But it's in moments like this, where others might be relaxed because we are safe here, until we look into the mirror and realize about situations like Waco and Flint and all the other ways that children die in this country when they don't have to. If we would just face some hard decisions, really some quite simple decisions when it comes to giving children something to drink, or letting them stand there with their signs a little bit longer, because maybe a bunch of teenagers with signs will get hungry themselves and go away, and you don't have to shoot tear gas at them. Maybe, just maybe, that might happen. We ought to be working and speaking to these things. I'm not saying what side you should be on about Standing Rock. I am saying that I am absolutely certain what side God is on about how to treat children. And I believe that you are as well. We ought to be working and we ought to be speaking with God. In the United Church of Christ, we say that we believe in a God who is still speaking. The God of Isaac, the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Tracy, the God of Russ and Jason and Dale and everyone else here is still God. And will always, no matter what, consider each of us, all of us, whether we're here or in another place, a beloved child. Amen. Please join